Today we'll be analyzing the intersection between Latinx culture and mental health in college students and whether there are positive or negative impacts. For an introduction, the intersection of culture and mental health plays a crucial role in the lives of Latinx college students, but the real question is whether it is impacting them positively or negatively. For a history on the population and demographics, the Latinx population has deep roots in immigration from Mexico and countries in Latin and Central America. Throughout history, millions of Latinx immigrants have entered the United States and for various reasons. In the 1980s, when the U.S. saw increased numbers of migrants, it was projected that no more than 10% held anything higher than a high school diploma. Literature shows that Latinx immigrants migrate for a variety of reasons, including economic sustainability, health reasons, and involuntary reasons, such as conflicts and asylum seeking. Latinx college students are connected to the Latinx historical roots, as well as the culture that is brought with them. Cultural values such as familismo, respeto, traditional gender roles, and religiosity are some parts of the culture we will be examining. The emphasis on the history of Latinx immigration is to highlight the cultures that are brought with these immigrants. Coming to the United States, many of these immigrants bring their values and their cultures with them and in turn pass it down to their children. These parts of Latinx culture are deeply rooted in older generations who then turn around and attempt to push them onto their children, impacting their mental health. Next, let's move on to some research. Starting with the politics, understanding the impacts that policy has on Latinx college students is key to understanding fears and anxiety. Affirmative action and immigration policy are two political domains that contribute to mental health issues. Especially in recent times and administrations, anti-immigrant, anti-Latinx rhetoric has been rampant and has serious implications for college students and their mental health. Research conducted by Portillo et al. In 2022 highlights how the constantly changing political rhetoric and increased use of technology impacts the mental health of Latinx college students. Their conclusion is that increased online racism and discrimination has a relationship to the mental health outcomes of Latinx students. Ion et al. In 2024 also highlights the impacts that this has on undocumented students specifically. Immigration policy and anti-immigrant rhetoric play key roles in lower rates of students seeking out mental health care. So in turn, politics play key roles in the outcomes of Latinx college students' mental health, especially when it impacts them directly or those around them. Now circling back to cultural values, Corona et al.'s research supports the idea that pressures of this culture can negatively impact a student's mental health by making them feel more isolated and disconnected from their surroundings and their own ethnic identity. There is a distinction that must be made between cultural values and cultural stressors. Arguably, values could become your stressor due to a lack of connection, and an example being if a student is not connected to the value of familismo, which is the value of family connection, it tends to lead to increased symptoms of depression and anxiety. This research highlights the intersections of culture and mental health, along with how values, despite having beneficial aspects, can just as easily turn into stressors for students, contributing to worse mental health outcomes. It is worth noting that Corona et al.'s research also discusses the opposite of this pattern. So therefore, having a steady connection and having a steady relationship with culture and with the values of this culture can act actually more as a deterrent or a buffer to worse mental health outcomes. So therefore, students are then less likely to develop bad mental health symptoms. If we also look at the social aspects of this, Batty and Andrade 2019 provides a systematic overview of factors that impact Latinx students' development of or worsening depression and anxiety. They introduce the concept of foreigner objectification, which seemingly has overlap with discrimination in this case. Their findings are that those with higher levels of perceived discrimination or foreigner objectification have worse mental health outcomes. The part that makes this research very significant is that this was conducted with students from a Hispanic serving institution 4-year university. Conducting the study at an HSI provides a look at the fact that systematic barriers are still prevalent at institutions that are labeled diverse and accepting. Supposed safe spaces for minority students continue to prove that Latinx students face adversity and struggles with mental health everywhere. Okay, so now that we went through all of the data and the research that I have to offer you, I do want to move on and discuss a little bit about some suggestions for future research, some drawbacks that I noticed during my research, and then how that can be addressed in future research. The reflexivity on my end in doing my research, and then how this ultimately contributes to global studies as a whole. So some suggestions for future research. For starters, any future research done in correlation to this topic would only serve to enhance our understanding of college students and their connection to culture, and then how that intersects with mental health as a whole. This can ultimately be done through a wide range of studies because this issue is not one-sided and needs a lot of inputs. So while the humanities can handle the cultural aspects of this and how students interact with their culture, we would then need physical scientists and their input, and then how that impacts their mental health. And then when those two come together, we understand fully the intersection of how culture and college students interact with their mental health. Some research questions that can be addressed in this research are also a wide variety, but I think something that needs a little bit more attention is the technology aspect of this. We live in an age where technology is in our daily lives and it's constantly evolving, and especially in college students that are using technology on a regular basis to do assignments. They also are more than likely attached to their phones 24/7 and are exposed to a wide variety of media, news, and rhetoric that ultimately will potentially impact their mental health. So I think research needs to be done to fully understand and grasp it, especially in this new age where technology is constantly growing and constantly evolving, to be able to understand how that truly impacts their mental health. So a drawback that I did notice in doing my research was the lack of understanding of the term Latinx. Latinx is a very broad term, and it is used typically to refer to people of Hispanic descent. And so because it's of Hispanic descent, there is it is a very wide encompassing term. But a lot of the articles that I would open or that I would try to use for this research in itself would start using Latinx in the title, but then proceed to only ever talk about Mexican American or Mexican immigrant students in the United States. So future research needs to be able to use the term Latinx in its correct form and be able to understand that Latinx is a very broad term, and if it is only going to be discussing Mexican American students, we are discrediting and no longer acknowledging the lived experiences of anybody else under that term, and therefore the validity of their research is very low and no longer applies to Latinx individuals as a whole. Now moving on to the reflexivity on my end during my research. Being a Latinx student myself, I had my own thoughts and I had my own feelings going into this research, but I strongly believe that I was able to cultivate and create a research project that neither confirmed nor denied my own feelings, but rather presented research that was able to show that the intersection of mental health and culture in Latinx college students is more so dependent on the person and their own connection to their culture. So rather it doesn't have a one answer that it's positive or negative and how that impacts their mental health. It can be positive, but it can also be negative. And it ultimately just really depends on the person. And I believe that my research was able to pull that idea forward and showcase that rather than my own personal feelings and my own personal thoughts. But moving on to how this impacts global studies as a field of study. Like I said earlier, these are not unique experiences to Latinx college students or even just college students as a whole. So while my research was based here in the United States, these are problems and feelings that apply to anybody and everybody. It's ultimately also showing the interconnectedness of our world and how all of our cultures really do overlap, and that the intersection of my culture and somebody else's culture is also impacting mine or their mental health. So while this is not just an issue for Latinx students, this is an issue for students, but also just human beings as a whole. But yeah, thank you so much for listening.